Is your team not performing well? Is morale low and turnover high? Are you falling further behind the competition? I'm here to help. I'm your host, Shani, and this is the Leadership Show, where business strategy and culture finally meet, and we make the long-awaited shift from rhetoric to results. I promise I'm not your typical boring leadership consultant, and I will help you get your shift together. Let's do this. Hey, Leader Shifters, and welcome to another episode of the Leader Shifter Show with Shani. I cannot wait for you to meet today's guest, Dave Poston, Esquire, who is not only a long-term friend of mine, but we've been doing business together for many years. He helps me with my public relations, or his firm helps me. I've done strategic planning with them and done executive coaching. So we are intertwined in each other's lives. And that's not why I'm having him on the podcast, obviously. I'm having him on the show because Dave is a communications expert extraordinaire. Even though he went to law school, he never technically practiced in big law, although he is GC of the firm. He went straight into doing marketing, communications, and business development for a lot of the AmLaw 100 firms, and took that experience and founded his company, Poston Communications, little over 18 years ago, if I have that right.
Yep.
And now they are PR, communications, marketing, content, counsel, not only to law firms, but to other professional services firms like, financial, real estate, healthcare, etc. And they see all sorts of things. And I thought in this day and age, it would be very helpful to have Dave on the show to address some of the most interesting communications challenge that you all might be having today. So strap on your seatbelts. We're going to cover everything from tips on CEO and executive communication to the Ukraine and more. Dave, welcome to the Leader Shifter Show.
Thank you, Shani. Nice to be here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. So Dave is joining us today from his home office in Denver, which has a special place in my heart because lots of you know I lived in Vail for many years and I am bummed about missing the ski season. But Dave was just in Vail. He sent me pictures, so I get to live vicariously through you a lot. Right, so Dave, let's just back up a little bit and share with us the creation story of your company. What made you go from working for firms to being entrepreneurial and founding Poston Communications?
Well, I was actually really lucky because I had a bunch of entrepreneurs in the family. So my stepfather and mother, he was a physician and eye doctor, and they built and ran a surgery center next to that. My sister is an entrepreneur with restaurants and real estate. I have an uncle and aunt who are entrepreneurs in Maine with sporting goods stores and hotels and all kinds of things like that, adventure vacation companies. So I had a lot of influence, and they were always encouraging that it should be at least something that we all try. And whether or not we go back to corporate America, which has a lot of great things to offer, to just try to go out on your own for a minute and see what it's like.
Well, seems that you caught that entrepreneurial bug because your firm has been very successful, and it's been a lot of fun to watch you grow and expand, to have staff in Atlanta, Orlando, Denver, New York, and a variety of other cities to serve law firms and your other clients. So let's get right into some of the questions that are top of mind for folks right now. First of all, CEO and executive communication, right? Leading from the top, having consistent messaging from our C-suite internally and externally, both with the media, to stakeholders and clients. More important than ever that there's consistency in that messaging and frankly, the branding on that. So given that you and your firm, Counsel, folks on those topics, what are some of the top tips and tricks that you recommend to your clients?
Well, you definitely said it correct about consistency. We often also say frequency. And I also like how you identified audiences. So, it's really important for executives to have a pretty clear platform, whether that be a mission and values for your company or the platform for 2022 that they're operating from. One of the tips is in messaging and message development is have 3 items that you sort of stick to. So over an annual sort of platform or goal set for the C-suite, 3 is a good number to aim for. And then you want to sort of hammer that message in a lot of different ways and repeatedly. So if a CEO or any executives don't have a channel of communication, whether that be a simple, town hall in-person type meeting for their company or department, or a sort of internal newsletter or something like that, you want to create that channel and make it a channel you use frequently and funnel important information through so that people know to rely on it and all that. The commitment to do a channel and a frequent communications of it gives people a great expectation, but also reminds a leader to share and to bring things forth to talk about. So those are kind of some of the intro comments. But then, I think having sort of that foundation, you can then sort of go beyond that. So teaching yourself about communications and operating in that way helps you understand branding more and marketing more and other things when you might ask others to fulfill those tasks for you. So there's benefits of all types. On the audience side, you really want to identify, everybody instantly thinks of either external or media, so maybe clients or media, but those audiences aren't the only ones. You've obviously got internal comms, all the employees and team members, maybe you have partners, you also have vendors, you might also have to work with the government in certain ways, and regulatory bodies. So when you are communicating, you're thinking of all of those audiences, but certainly different messages and important messages are sent to different audiences in different ways. And some get a little bit more information or a little bit less, but you really kind of want to try to make it as consistent as possible, so everybody's getting the same message. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's really nice to do that kind of work and watch C-suite or other executive leaders really amp up their communications efforts and watch them sort of emerge as a better leader because of it.
Okay. Another question related to that. What's the number one mistake you see senior leaders making when they're talking to the media?
Oh gosh, it's probably thinking or being a little hard on themselves and thinking that they have to answer every question. And you would know this from running the television station in Vail. You're not always the right person to answer a question. First of all, you couldn't possibly have all the right answers or all the answers. And sometimes what you're set up to speak about isn't where an interview sort of goes. And it's certainly okay to say to a journalist, wow, it's a really great question and a really important topic, but I honestly didn't prepare for that today. And I would really love to cover that with you, but we need to set another time to conduct an interview that would give that important issue its full coverage.
Excellent. I love that. And one of the things that struck me when you first started answering the question was being, a mission and values based organization. So I wanted to drill a little deeper into the mission and values of Poston Communications, because I think they're very instructive and a great example for other organizations to learn from. So I'm just going to read your mission. It's one of the things I love about it is it's short and sweet. And it gives you a really good flavor for the culture. It's excellence in communication to improve people's lives, both personally and professionally. So tell us why you addressed personally and professionally, and if there's any reason that personally comes before professionally.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It actually does, I guess, sometimes. When you're doing sort of a sales chart or a sales map, for example, you always want to look at someone's personal goals and needs as much as you want to look at what they're doing in their job. And the reason you do that is because that's driving their decision. on whether or not to hire you or, buy something from your company or something. So, yeah, and personally is, it's just as important. So if our culture is that everyone's personal lives be better, which it is, then that's important to remember that when you're dealing with work. Work isn't so important that it should overtake, someone's happiness. And you can think about companies like Microsoft and the whole concept of changing the world. If people understand that they're changing the world, they're often happier at work, and having positive influence on society. So it's important to understand the person and then also how that person interacts with the work and then the work itself.
Right. It reminds me of the quote, I think I can attribute it to Richard Branson. And I know other people have said this in other ways. If you take care of your employees, they will take care of your customers and your business will thrive.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
Love that that's part of your mission. And there's 6 or 7 values. I just wanted to touch on a couple that I thought were really differentiated. One is proactively and humbly predict client needs and teach others about service as well. That is so rich and multiply nuanced.
Yes.
If you could speak to that one.
Yeah, well, service is so important, whether you are selling a product or selling a service. And really, if you look at great organizations like Nordstrom's and the Ritz-Carlton, I mean, service is the foundation of their organization. They say they're a service organization, even though they're doing something else.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And so it's really important to focus on that because everybody can teach each other tips and tricks about service, whether it be making sure you have clients' birthdays on your calendar to remember them as individuals, or, when you're providing professional services and delivering those, simple things like proofing or whatever, but also making their lives easier. So you can write emails for your clients to report to their, sort of leaders, or, sort of proactively understand and process map their relationships and what their job is, and where you can come in and provide them additional value beyond, just, getting them in front of the media, for example.
And why is humility specifically pointed out in that value?
Oh gosh, I mean, service, a lot of people would be perhaps, embarrassed to sort of say they sort of humble themselves to provide good service. But again, you can use the hotel example. If you are there to serve someone, it's okay. The pride comes from great service, not there's no issue with serving others, if you will. And humility is sort of a conscious thing that if you think about it and ruminate on it and adopt it for yourself, there's great power in sort of being humble and giving others their due and looking out for others in a way that's really caring.
I love that. So you don't have to wave a flag, we're the best, hire us, no one else can compare. Where the rubber meets the road is actually you're delivering it and proving it through the humble actions and service that you're providing to clients. That's fantastic advice. The other value I wanted to touch on is a focus on leadership. Study it, practice, and challenge it with thoughtful recommendations. And one of the things I love about that one is you're encouraging your entire organization to focus on leadership, not just you and let's say your number 2 and 3 people.
Yes.
Explain to us the strategy there.
Well, yeah, and I mean, certainly the more we, again, sort of concentrate on leadership and commit ourselves to understanding it, that would either be through looking to examples of others, or, reading and educating ourselves in a professional development fashion, or pursuing volunteer roles that are one step ahead, let's say, of where I am in my job. It gives them all this chance to sort of be aware that it's really that they are becoming these leaders and therefore can better advise leaders. We really want to step into those roles to be good advisors. And you have to create those opportunities for yourself and seize them, and helping people understand how to do that and whatnot. And certainly leaders would know that it lightens the load when there's more leaders behind you. So everybody can't be the captain every day, but we want them to strive in that fashion for themselves.
Absolutely. You want a strong bench
Yes,
in your organization,
absolutely.
just like you would on your sports team. And it really speaks to the fact that everyone can be a leader. It's how you show up. It's not necessarily your title, and you can be leaderly in how
Yes,
you can conduct yourself.
absolutely, absolutely. And really defining what a leader is really is defining what the best kind of person you can be. And so you're sort of fulfilling that as you sort of commit to looking at leadership, regularly, daily. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of thought leadership, wanted to get your perspective on some of the critical issues that are pervading life pretty much everywhere right now. And I'd be remiss if I didn't start with what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine. What are you hearing from clients? What counsel are they seeking? What are you telling them, etc.?
Yeah, certainly, for some of our professional services clients, some of whom even have offices in Russia, you're dealing with the sanctions and making sure that you understand what they are, how to comply with them, how quickly you have to comply with them, and whatnot. But there is that extension which applies to all businesses, which is, do I have business in Russia or relations in Russia or some connection to the country, where I don't really necessarily want to be supporting the war effort in the invasion of the Ukraine. And so you've seen a lot of companies take stances and pull out, if you will, in spite of sanctions or going further than the sanctions, for example. And I think that this is an example, of ESG at work and corporate missions and values at work, where companies are taking those stances. And it's just an important signal, but it's also important, it's a life or death at this point. And so it's great to see leaders taking action in that regard.
So we've seen so many news stories hitting our feeds, Google cuts off relations with Russia, Microsoft, Twitter, Facebook, or Meta, whatever they're called these days.
Mhm.
How do you distinguish your company from just seeming like a sheep, like, oh, we have to do this because everybody else is doing it?
Oh, yeah, it's a good point. Well, what you're connecting there is a situation like Ukraine to a company's overall effort with regard to its own mission, values, and environmental and social governance, for example. And so companies that have defined and identified what they need to be moving forward on those issues would never be perceived. So it's kind of like crisis planning. If you're doing it up front and you're establishing what your ESG guidelines are and what the mission and values of your company are, when a situation like this arises, it fits perfectly within those commitments. It's not like following along as the sheep. And certainly the timeline to decision making is important. I mean, companies have their own decision making triage processes or whatever. So in some ways, don't be too change your culture just to make a quick decision. But, I think that all of your audiences would want to know that you considered something like, if you had ties to Russia or for example, on the diversity front, as we've seen over the last couple of years, that companies are establishing their position on those issues and then taking action to move forward. And then now following up on them, which is one of the things we're sort of seeing on the DE&I front. So.
Right. I actually wanted to get into more detail on the DEI subject because pre-show you were telling me something interesting that I wanted you to share with the audience about annual diversity reporting and following up on commitments that were made last year or even in previous periods. And have they met those commitments or have they fallen down, and how do you communicate respectively.
Yeah, well, certainly something like sanctions, the government is establishing a timeline. But for something like diversity, companies made their own commitments, but also maybe or maybe didn't have a timeline. So if you did have a timeline, you certainly want to follow up on that, both internally and externally. But if you didn't have one, it's also still important because you do need to measure, what gets measured gets changed kind of concept. And, you don't want to have something terrible happen and then let the energy go away from it for something that's so important. And so you want to sort of remember that, okay, about a year or so ago, something pretty big happened and we made a lot of commitments, and where are we with that? And you want to follow up with that and follow through, and really kind of recommit, if you will. And so, whether that's part of your platform as a CEO or not, you want to sort of make sure that it's still in there. DE&I is just as important as ESG, if not more in some ways. So we do reporting for some organizations, report development, production, writing. And so it's nice because when they take the time to do those reports, whether it be a portion of an annual corporate report or a standalone piece, it's just great to see them sort of revisit. And by asking everybody to contribute to that report, they self-measure and then sort of say, oh gosh, I need to move to this forward, or that was pretty well done. So.
Right. And how would you counsel a company that gets challenged either by shareholders or employees about whether their commitment to DEI is merely check the box or sincere?
Yeah, obviously, that it's not just the media that's going to ask that, right? And so it's really important to understand your numbers or your baseline. It's very important to understand the pipeline through which people move, and through which you can sort of add people to your organization or send them off to other great leadership roles. So if you have your baseline and you understand what you're kind of dealing with, and then obviously creating a plan so that you can, very specific SMART goals or something you taught me about, put some SMART goals on it or something like that, so that it's small but impactful steps forward. And then, over time, you can see the greater sort of change and impact of it all combined. And, I think we always tell people that it isn't something that's going to be solved overnight, but if we all keep regularly on it, that's what's important. And that's part of the message. So if you get asked, it's sort of like, oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. We'd love to talk to you about that. And let me tell you sort of the small incremental steps we've been taking and how they're having some big impacts. So being pretty clear about it is important.
And would you recommend being transparent about the things they still need to accomplish going forward? Because it is something that takes place over time.
Yeah. We always say it's part of your culture forever. It's a long road, and there'll be different turns on that road along the way. But being transparent about your effort is what is really important. And it's not an excuse, but it's definitely a way to sort of be humble and show that you're continuing to commit to something like that.
Right. Okay. So another question is, there is so much content out there on a zillion different channels, it seems. How, in this barrage and overwhelm with content, can an organization or its leaders stand out, distinguish themselves from the pack, if you will?
Yeah, so it's a common question we get. And what's really important about it is to start at the beginning, which is, who are you actually trying to reach? So we had an organization come to us and say, oh, we want to go into the New York metro market and target healthcare and hospital systems. And we want to do this sort of ad campaign, we want to do these other things. And then we sort of said, well, how many healthcare and hospital systems are you really targeting in that market? And it turned out there was only 6. So in that instance, a broad-based branding effort is practically or potentially a waste of money. The tactical approach needs to be much more targeted. And so there wouldn't be need to do a bunch of content about changes in healthcare regulations in New York State, for example, or something like that. And so understanding them, who you're targeting, and then, be really creative in terms of understanding, a lot of, people commit to, say, a podcast, on this incredibly fast, regular basis. Well, maybe the people that you're targeting wouldn't have time to listen to that, or would prefer to receive their information on a different channel. And so you've got to do a little bit more research to figure out where and how often and all kind of stuff, and set that in place. But then when it comes to the content itself, being really creative and creating incredibly valuable materials. So we see a lot of surveys, data-driven information. Companies actually, you don't even need to do a survey sometimes, because companies actually may hold a lot of information in their
their big data.
Yeah, and their big data, and so just looking at it and sort of repositioning it and offering it in a unique way, is what can make you really stand out. Rather than, big isn't necessarily better in terms of readership or numbers and things like that. It's really the quality of what you're distributing.
Got it. So contrary to what some people might think, when you say do a survey, it doesn't mean you have to hire Gallup and survey tens of thousands of people.
Right.
You could do something on a smaller scale and it still have statistical significance. Is that right?
Yeah. So in the professional service realm, for example, statistical validity comes at about 80 responses. But when you're thinking about data and information, you want to, you could even be repackaging publicly available information. We had an accounting firm that did that off of some audit information. And it was just the analysis of the information that was really valuable. It wasn't just the plain primary information. So yeah, you don't have to spend a lot of money to do something really powerful.
Yeah, what just came up for me when you said that, it's the analysis, and even just doing people the favor of curating the important things, so they don't have to go through pages and pages of Google results.
Right. Yeah. Perfect. Good point.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so I guess the last topic, which I some little bit of hesitation to address, because I feel like this record has been playing for a long time, but it's still an issue. Office mandates for any business post-COVID, because you hear a bunch of different things. Some companies are staying virtual, some companies are mandatory back in the office, some companies are hybrid. What's the best practice for communicating about that? Because you will never make everybody happy with the decision.
Yeah, I know. I mean, obviously you want to communicate your reasons for whatever you've chosen pretty clearly. If you can back it up with stories and anecdotes about how something worked or didn't work. You talk a lot about culture, Shane, and we really see that different cultures are impacting whether or not that's what choice you make. And we're actually starting to see some problems with organizations that didn't go back.
Mm-hmm.
And where, for example, marketing and business development departments really need to interact with their professionals on a regular basis. And because they're not in the office, it just isn't happening. And I can literally think of 4 organizations that we work with where we're seeing that problem be a problem, that they are still remote and virtual. The problem could be solved through great leadership. One of the quick steps would be to go back to the office. It doesn't necessarily need to be that, but I think if you're honest about whether or not there are systems in place and good leadership in place to overcome the distance between people, then it's okay to stay out of the office. If you don't have good leadership and good systems, you should go back, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. And again, it comes down to the theme of this podcast, which is communication. So if you've got attorneys across different practice areas, for example, and people doing business development, they're not bumping into each other in the, by the water cooler or whatnot. And so, I broke my own rule about not turning off my phone for a podcast. So if they're not bumping into each other casually or jumping into each other's offices, casually a few times a week to say, hey, working on a new matter with a nuance that you might be able to initiate conversations with other clients or with new clients to generate the business. If those kinds of conversations aren't
Right.
happening, the well's going to be dry.
Exactly. And there's very, very simple fixes. So in my world, a business development person could read about every new client that's coming in the door by reading the new client lists every day. They could go into the office infrequently, but still wander the halls once or twice a week, just for that sole deliberate purpose, typically in the mornings when more people would be there.
Make rounds like a doctor.
Yeah, make rounds, start an internal business development newsletter that encourages the sharing of information if we didn't have one of those before, or even set up a more regular frequency in terms of a group meeting, initiate a different type of meeting, like a sales meeting where they go around and talk about clients or something like that. So there's ways that it can be done. It just has to be very deliberate.
Right. And that is the key, is being deliberate, being proactive, and like you said, having smart enough leadership to set that tone about the importance of communication from the very top.
Yeah, and if they make a decision to stay out of the office, it's important to say, and we would like to reiterate that these things are very important for the continued ongoing functioning of the organization, because we do see the COVID meetings that have happened, like when they did people that did establish a meeting like that was regular, people are now kind of zoning out on those because it doesn't feel so fresh and unique. And so you have to revitalize those meetings. You have to play music to start them. You have to assign people in the room to run the meetings, or play little games with each other. So it can't just all be business, because people just aren't paying attention so much.
Absolutely. So any last words of advice for the leader shifters listening and watching today?
Well, I just the one topic that I had noted that we didn't really cover in depth was just the level of change management that we're all going through. It kind of spins off of the COVID thing, and then certainly Ukraine. Change management is a science. It's a functioning thing that leaders have to sort of get a hold of and manage over time. Change is a constant, so it's something, a theory of communications and CEO and executive leadership comms that's really important to look at. Just remember, you're managing change as much as you're managing anything else.
Absolutely. And I love that as a closing comment, because change is happening at even greater velocity, and sometimes it's really sucker punching us. And so the skills that people are honing today, whether it's because of the pandemic, Ukraine, oil prices, diversity and inclusion, like all the skills and subject matters that you've helped us clarify communications techniques for before, is not just for now. We want to take these lessons and keep applying them as situations develop over time. And folks, if you feel like you're in over your head, it's firms like Dave's that can help you communicate as effectively as you can. They're communications experts. You're expert at something else. And there's absolutely no shame in asking for help, even if you're in the C-suite, because again, as we talked about so many times today, operating from your mission and your values and being transparent and being open are aspects of communication that are never going away. And so if you're not already managing all of your constituencies on that basis, listen to this again.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Dave.
No, I was going to say President Zelensky in the Ukraine is a wonderful example of someone whose communications efforts are paying huge dividends. And what he's establishing now is a response, but what he's speaking to, what he's talking about the Ukraine being a peaceful country and all of that, it's establishing an identity for the country, no matter what happens to them. And it's empowering and emboldening the citizens to remember the Ukraine, no matter what happens. So he's a wonderful communication study.
Oh, I love that. And what I also love is that he's not a career politician.
Right, he was a comedian, and that he was a communicator. he
The
was,
ultimate communicators,
Yeah.
someone that can make you laugh.
yeah,
We all need more of that.
yeah.
So Dave, if people want to reach you either to hire Poston Communications or just to have you elaborate on something we discussed today, what's the best way?
Probably easiest is phone, which is 404-875-3400.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Leadershifters, thanks again for joining us today. I hope you got as much value out of this as I did. And of course, you know how to reach me, Shani at theleadershipproject.com, and on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook/Meta, and all the podcast sites to listen to the Leadershifter Show. So as always, thanks for joining us. Till next
Thank you,
time.
Shani.